I would like to talk you through the new guidelines for junction design, although I said these things, but I'm not sure if you heard me, so I'll say it again. So we have basic requirements, junctions, and roundabouts. So 3 parts to the new guidelines. The General Directorate for Public Roads, back when it was a General Directorate for Public Roads, published a set of guidelines, but now this is supposed to be modified, and the decision was taken to split it into 3 parts: basic requirements, junctions, and roundabouts. So at the end of the set of guidelines, there are examples of the designs. There are recommended designs as if templates. Just as you've heard from Professor Olszewski before me, well, I don't want to go through the surveys and the errors or the sources of errors, and so we only have some selected aspects listed here, which should be covered in the new guidelines. For example, there are no detailed requirements for passability. Up until now, it wasn't made clear what sort of vehicles should be able to go through a junction. So we are now adding the detail to that. Next up, we have to have specific limits for vertical alignments on ramps and junctions. And there, up until now, we've had some limitations as to where junctions could be located, so that has to be taken care of. And now we don't have a definition of exits from junctions, so that's something that has to be added. The next problem is a side distance between junctions, which is a problem, especially when it comes to national roads passing through small towns. A lot of times, side distance requirements are not met. And also defining visibility or side distance at roundabouts, that's not been covered up until now, so we need a definition of that. Other problems that we know from the surveys is that it's not clear in detail how approaches to roundabouts should look like, and it's difficult to design short sections of additional lanes. And also for turbo roundabouts, those are not covered properly in the regulations. Well, as I said, when it comes to junctions, we haven't had that many comments or remarks from the respondents. Many of them were identical. I suppose it's because we have the previous guidelines from 2001, which were pretty good. So junctions are divided into ordinary and channelized junctions. And then we have roundabouts, which are divided into mini roundabouts, single lane, and turbo roundabouts. And those that are signalized are part of channelized junctions. So what are the new elements when it comes to junction design? Obviously, there are many more changes in the draft guidelines, but for example, in terms of the really fundamental changes, we have a definition of junction. We've introduced a new idea, speed to be designed at junctions, and Professor Olszewski mentioned that as well. So we now have this term of speed to be designed. And then we have conditional passability. That's a new element here. And then The scope of applying junctions, well, that's changed because we now also have complex junctions. There is a change when it comes to site distance. We've added a lot more detail to that. I think it will now be clear in the new guidelines. So that's been extended significantly compared to what we had, and also lower standards under difficult conditions. So I don't want to go into difficult conditions because we've heard that before. I mean, when the topography or the site is difficult, then it's okay to lower the standards, but the minimum standards have to be kept anyway. So the junction and its area. So you can see the graph. So every time we have additional elements, such as widening of the road or additional lanes, then as you can see in the lower part, then we also have to take account of traffic conditions. Obviously, this has a lot more detail in the guidelines. Now, the speed to be designed. Well, we need to be clear about design parameters. So there's just one type of speed that should be designed for, as opposed to what we had previously. Just to give you a quick idea on how to determine the speed, if there are no pedestrian crossings, and if the entry has priority, then it may range with no pedestrian crossings 90, with pedestrian crossings that's 50 kilometers. And obviously it's up to the designer to pick the right speed, and then they will also have to ensure that the other parameters go hand in hand with these values. In terms of the reference vehicles and passability, well, I won't go into much detail, but it's about passability, and then it's now more clear what traffic corridors are and what they should be. And also there are recommendations for picking the reference vehicles for designing junctions, and that should reflect the type of road and its function. So the functions like, I don't know, commercial or residential function. So there is a new term there, which is conditional passability, and that means that we can use traffic corridors from the opposing entry, as you can see here. And so some of the corridors can overlap. It's okay, because what we don't want is to extend junctions too much, especially when those junctions are located in city centers under dense development conditions. On the left-hand side, there is a template, and similar templates are included in the guidelines. It's pretty much like what we had before with the turns, and there's this additional area there to accommodate the vehicle. And the radiuses are also given there in the table. The scope of using junctions, so we have road classes like S, no such junctions, and then some of the roads in Poland can only be accessible through interchanges. So this proposal was made, for example, to introduce right turns only. A lot of times it's just to keep the costs down. So I won't go into the details too much. In the previous guidelines, we had what's called complex junctions with different entries. We also have conditions for junctions, when they should be used. So there are some criteria like functions, location, safety, traffic efficiency, and socioeconomic costs. And the slide here shows you how those selections should be made. This is in reference to traffic volumes, but this is just a general approach because the designer has to go through detailed analyses anyway. And so, as I said, there are other criteria like safety and the socioeconomic costs as well. So how do you design junctions at a crossing of different road classes with different cross sections? Side distance, that's how it was up until now. So approaching the junction, obviously that stays. But when it comes to side distance at 10 to 20 meters, that was eliminated. And there are obviously some relations between speeds depending on whether the road has priority or not, but we've now introduced a minimum. So on approaching a junction, so this is the visibility that has to be ensured, as presented by Professor Olszewski. When we have a crossing of involving pedestrians and cyclists, the side distance is also defined separately. Can I just ask you to move to the conclusions? And now, when it comes to the speed, we have that's presented in a table. Well, basically, the speed is as signposted, unless there are no signposts. Then we have to follow the design speed. And then delays or time lost, and that's also up to the designer to pick the right one. For turbo roundabouts, this is a roundabout geometry, and that's defined in the new guidelines. We have types of turbo roundabouts, as you can see in the slide. The design procedure is also defined. But there are also guidelines regarding the conversion of existing junctions. The idea is not to use multi-lane roundabouts. We are only going to have turbo roundabouts.